Good afternoon. I'm Donna Carlin. I'm going to talk about the bacterial meningitis vaccination requirement. In 2011, Senate Bill 1107 was passed, and that was the requirement that all entering students provide evidence of being vaccinated against bacterial meningitis, and that it had to be within the past 5 years and at least 10 days prior to the first day of the semester. If a student stops out for a long semester, in other words, a fall or a spring, then they again would have to provide evidence of being vaccinated. The legislation gave the coordinating board the authority to write rules to implement this legislation. And so we worked with a committee that reviewed a draft of the proposed rules, and then they were published in the Texas Register. And boy, did we hear back from the institutions. We had 222 comments. Primarily, they had to do with a request for an exemption for students enrolled in continuing education courses at community colleges. We had comments like, this would decimate the CE departments. And I think one of the most telling comments we got was that sometimes the vaccine costs more than the actual course that the students were taking. So we listened to the 222 comments and expanded the list of exemptions that were provided in the legislation. The first two, that students age 30 or over were exempt, and students enrolled only in all online courses were exempt, were in the legislation, but the others, exempting students that were enrolled in less than 360 contact hours in continuing education corporate training, as well as students enrolled in dual credit courses that were taken at the K through 12 facility were also exempt, as well as prisoners. So that list was expanded to include those. Each institution is required to designate a department or a unit that's responsible for receiving the information from students showing that they have had the vaccination. Those students, institutions are also required to provide information to students about the meningitis vaccine requirement, and that has to be written or electronic notification of the right of the students to claim an exemption. A lot of that notification has been dealt with because the Texas Common Application provides information about the vaccine requirements, so that's been used by a lot of institutions as a mechanism for which students have been notified. Institutions are able to grant extensions of up to 10 days so that students under justifiable circumstances can get the vaccine. That was really an issue last January when this law first went into effect. I think that especially with institutions that have students coming from foreign countries, that's become an important mechanism to use to allow students to use that 10-day extension. However, one of the common questions that we get is whether or not, let's say a student was vaccinated 3 days before the first day of the semester. We've had questions like, do they then have to wait the full 10 days or 7 more days before they can start classes? And I just wanted to clarify that there is no requirement in the rules for any waiting period. So in other words, the 10-day extension can be granted, but that doesn't mean that the student has to wait 10 days before they can start classes. The vaccine requirement is not required for students that have a medical reason, and to document that, then the students need a letter from their physician stating that for the student to obtain the vaccine would be injurious to their health. Another question that comes up a lot, and I think there's been confusion because the Department of State Health Services also has requirements for vaccines for children, but we've had the question about whether or not this letter has to be updated on an annual basis, and there's nothing, again, in our rules or in the statute that require that physician notification letter be updated. Students are also allowed to submit a conscientious objection. There are now 2 forms that can be used. One is on the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board website that can be downloaded. It has to be notarized and submitted to the institution, and that is only for students that are not living in dorms and for students that are under age 18. The other form is from the Department of State Health Services, and that form is for students that are living in the dorm and that are under age 18. That has to be requested by the Department of State Health Services. It can take up to 2 weeks for the students to receive that form. It again has to be notarized and submitted to the institutions. The reason I'm stressing that is because I've gotten a lot of calls from parents and from students that say, I have the form, how can I fax it to you? And I tell them it has to be submitted to the institution and not to the coordinating board. So the coordinating board form, it is on that opening page that you were shown yesterday under current issues, I think is the title. You click on bacterial meningitis and it takes you to the affidavit. The Department of State Health Services form, this is the link to it. It can also be requested by email, and again, it can take up to 2 weeks for the students to receive that form. We do get a lot of questions about bacterial meningitis, and I just wanted to go through some of the more common questions that we get. Back in 2001, there was a requirement for institutions to obtain a receipt of student confirmation about bacterial meningitis, and whether or not that's still a requirement, which it is. I know that's a long slide, but again, a lot of institutions use the Texas Common Application to have students then click that, yes, they've received this information. But that 2001 legislation is still in effect. Another question we get a lot is whether there's a way for institutions to get the vaccine at a reduced rate. There are 2 manufacturers of the bacterial meningitis vaccine. One is Novartis and the other is Sanofi. I've got their information. I know that the Novartis rep has been good about providing the vaccine at a Texas purchase, you know, how you can purchase things on a state contract rate, and they've made the vaccine available where it's decreased the cost for students, I think, down to about $68. So you'll have that contact information, but I needed to let you know that there are 2 manufacturers. One of the concerns that we hear a lot is that, you know, these are often admissions people or people, registrars, and they're getting all kinds of health documents. And whether or not there is some sort of standardized way to know or to read these documents to know how to verify that the student's been vaccinated. There are a couple of ways and a few things that you can look at. The signature or stamp of the physician or their designee. You can also get an official immunization record that's been generated from a state or local health authority, or an official record received from school officials, including a record from another state. This is consistent with what the Department of State Health Services does with elementary and high school students. What have been some of the common issues or concerns with the implementation of the legislation? I would say the biggest one has been the cost. I'm getting the hurry up sign. The other thing is that the vaccine is not available on the Adult Vaccine Safety Net program anymore, and so the cost of it can be up to $150 for students. The other big issue has been that there's been no money given, no money came with this legislation, so there's been no money for the institutions to carry out this mandate. What has the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board done to notify high school students about the vaccine requirement? One of the big things is that a joint letter was sent last year, and it was signed by the Commissioner of Higher Ed, the Commissioner of TEA, and the Commissioner of the Department of State Health Services, and it went to all high school counselors in the state, encouraging students to be vaccinated while they were still 18, because if they're 18, then they can still, and they've been on the Texas Vaccines for Children program, then the cost would be covered for them still. As with all legislation, there's been a question about whether military students are exempt. They're not, but that doesn't mean that future legislation won't address that. And I will answer any questions during the break. Thank you.